Good evening, everyone. We'll just give a start in a couple of minutes once some more participants come in. Good evening, everyone. I think let's get started. Thank you for joining this session on beating high cholesterol. I think as we get started, I'll quickly talk about the structure of how we'll spend the next 60-75 minutes. So the first 60 minutes, I think, is to understand the problem in some way or another, biology of or the physiology of what's happening underneath, and think about the solution, right? And I'll try to cover that in the next 55-60 minutes. And once that happens, then we talk about quickly, what it is that we do towards the end of the 55-60 minutes, and how the solution we have can help people that are, battling higher levels of cholesterol than are healthy, etc. Next, we'll have a Q&A session. So as we go through this presentation, should there be any questions, you will see two buttons out there on your screen. One called Q&A. So that's one place you could enter your questions as and when, based on what I'm saying, there's something that comes to mind. The other is there's also a chat option. So that's another option you could use to list out any questions that you might have, right? So I encourage you to do that as we go along. Quickly, introduction. My name is Vivek, and after spending life as in the industry as an entrepreneur, building companies, etc., ended up selling the company we started about a couple of years back. But in the process of doing whatever I did through my career, I ended up with various problems, right? One was diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, right? The other was obviously obesity in a sense, clinically, with higher level of fat than the body needs to have, etc. So that took me down a path of figuring out what are the reasons, right? What goes wrong in the body, right? Why are we at one time point in time working well as a body, and then what ends up happening? Why do we end up having some of these ailments? And mind you, these are not ailments where there's what I call a bad actor. It's not a pathogen, it's not a toxin, right, that is kind of impacting our health. It is essentially parts of a body that are not working well, right? And that journey opened my eyes to two things. One is the pace at which science has evolved and understanding is better, and why that's not yet available to people on the ground, and why that does not translate to advice. And two, the scale of the problem, right? A significant increase in the number of people that suffer from one or more of these, and we look all around us and we see that, right? And that's when this journey, which was meant to help me become healthier, also translated to a business, which is alt life, where we want to put together all of these and kind of make it easy for people that have some of these problems to get better health outcomes, right? So that's the backstory. And again, welcome you to this webinar. Look forward to walking you over some of these details. The intent is to not go too deep as well, but to just go to a level of depth that helps you understand the mechanics of what's going on. Should any one of us be interested, we're happy to engage separately and get into detailed discussions if that's of interest. We also have a lot of material on our website, as well as in the blogs and white papers that we have put out and we will continue to put out, that can help answer some of these questions. Right. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. All right. At the beginning, we're all pretty much like the car on the left, shiny, new, all parts working well, etc. And that's how each one of us start our life's journey, right? But over a period of time, we end up at different destinations, and it all depends on the kind of choices that we make. For example, with the car, how we drive it, how we maintain it, whether we brake in the right way, etc., determines what the condition of the car is, the engine is, and how well does it run, what is the efficiency, etc., over a period of time. Same thing with the body, right? There are choices that we make, and depending on how we use or abuse our body and mind, we end up at a state, right? We could be well maintained, working well, which is fantastic, or there could be parts of our body, parts of our engine, parts of our transmission that's not working well, right? And these are not because of contaminants, right? I mean, it is because of contaminants to an extent, but this is not because of an accident. This is not because of any kind of a manufacturing defect, right? Those would be genetic diseases. Accidents would be like us getting infections, right? But these are purely based on how we use or abuse our body, right? Now, while I mean this is easy to understand, what's staggering is the scale, right? If you take a look, there's an explosion of the number of cases across different kinds of what we call lifestyle disorders or non-communicable diseases, right? You will see the rampant increase in heart disease rates, right? We've kind of become the de facto diabetes capital of the world, right? Hypertension abounds everywhere we look, right? PCOD, impacting 1 in 5 women, and the rate is increasing, right? Again, by the definition of obesity, right? Many of us would like to say we're not obese, right? Because we feel fine and we're not as big. But I think the definition is basically the percentage of a body that's made up of fat. And by that definition, there's a significant number of us that are obese, right? 2, 3 observations around this. One, this wasn't the case, right? You go back in time, this was far lesser, right? It used to be 1 in 20 adults if you go back in time 4, 5 decades, right? Steadily over a period of time, while science has evolved, unfortunately, the state of our health has decreased, right? And there are correlations, and I'll kind of get to that as we move along. Secondly, the age at which this is impacting people is becoming younger and younger, and that's scary, right? The incidence of child obesity, the incidence of adolescent diabetes, etc., even onset of PCOD, etc., it's reached scary proportions, right? And while this is true for India, if you were to look at the world, nothing better, right? Right now, in a population of about 7 billion across our planet, right, it's in excess of 1 billion people that suffer from some of these and are at a high risk of this, right? And that's not the end of the story. Over the next couple of decades, it's supposed to get to 2 billion, right? A significant bunch of the population are going to be afflicted by this. And we will realize it is because of reasons well within our control, but it is extremely scary. The planet has become a warehouse of disease, right? Notwithstanding the spikes that we get when things like COVID-19, etc., attack. Despite all of that, we still have an explosive rate, right? And on top of that are other infectious disease that outbreaks happen once in a while. The next question then is, can this damage be undone, right? And more importantly, can we prevent more of this damage from happening, right? So that was what we set out to explore as we charted this journey. And one thing, while the stats may seem very scary, right, and depressing in a way, right, what gives us hope is the answer to this question of, can the damage be undone and can we prevent more damage from happening, is a emphatic yes, right? So everything of the science that we kind of put together, right, understood different components of the processes that happen in the body, and are we able to undo some of them, right? We applied it. We did a small trial with around 15 people, some of the results that you can see, and we got extraordinary outcomes, right? People with high level of diabetes, a very high HbA1c, significant reduction. People where they had skewed ratios of cholesterol, significant reduction. People with a significantly more proportion of body fat in their body, significant reduction. And as a byproduct, almost everybody ended up with significant and sustainable weight loss, right? So that gave us the confidence that what we've done is right. As we applied, we are seeing results that are extremely encouraging, and that sets us out on this path of how do we then go forth out in various places, in different cities, and partner with such people and help improve their health outcomes, right? So takeaways from this introductory section, I think 1 in 2 adults globally suffer from or are at a high risk. So the numbers are scary, right? The rate of growth of this is in scary proportions. Second, as we speak, there's no known cure, right? Any medicine that we take for any of these conditions is not solving the problem, right? What it's doing is helping manage the symptom and giving us a sense that we're controlling our destiny. But what we need to understand is, in addition to the side effects that happen, as you dig deeper, the condition is not improving, right? The symptomatic manifestation is becoming better, but you're still headed towards the same destination, the same complications, and increase in medicine dosages and complications, etc., right? And like I said, that leads to the third point, which is, while you continue through this journey, there is deterioration of one's health, complications increase, and there are higher chances of an early death, right? But the key takeaway is, this doesn't need to be the case, right? We've proven it, and that's something that we want to offer to everybody that is facing problems, that high cholesterol is fixable, as are most of those other problems that we kind of see, right? And that is something that we want to kind of talk about as we go through with the session, right? So let's take a quick pause here, right? And we want to make it a little interactive. There'll be a poll that will come on your screen, and you'll get a shot at answering some of these questions that you see on the screen. One is, high cholesterol is because we eat too much fat, right? What do we believe? Is that true or false, right? Similarly, total cholesterol is something we should track and be worried about. What do we believe? Is that again true or false? So you'll get this poll, just take a moment and try and answer what you feel. We'll see how the results are, and we will answer these questions as we kind of go along. Okay, let's see. Okay, it's split 50-50, which is good. Not good, but I mean, there are both views. Okay, let's go to the second one. Let's see how this turns out. Again, it'll be interesting to see. And one of the things I've realized, again, if I take myself as of 1.5, 2 years back to now, right? I think in general there is a lack of understanding, right, of how each of these work, and that manifests in there is some level of understanding, but not an in depth or in detail understanding. And hopefully we'll answer these questions and we'll get to know, right? And as you can see on the screen, obviously all of us believe that most of us believe that total cholesterol is something that we should be worried about, right? And we'll answer this question as we kind of go along. Thank you for participating in that. But when we talk about cholesterol, I think in some way it is tied to the level of fat in our body, right? Because cholesterol in essence are fat molecules. So in the next couple of slides, I just want to kind of talk about some of the concepts around this. This is the classical definition, right, of the mechanics that happen, right? Which is, if we have the right calories in and the right calories out, our weight is maintained. If our calories in is low and our calorie out is high, we lose weight, and the reverse, right? And intuitively, this makes a lot of sense. The only thing is, I just want to say one thing. I think this is a cruel hoax, right? This is more what's called a proximate cause, not the ultimate cause. I think we need to understand what is at play and why is this seemingly logical, seemingly intuitive, concept or paradigm wrong. And I'll kind of walk you through the misunderstanding in the onset of fat accumulation, right? Typical belief, and our logic tells us that it's a personal choice. We end up eating more calories, we end up making choices that end up burning less calories, and that results in accumulation of high fat, right? And that's what we've been led to believe. So people who end up having higher levels of fat, etc., it's seen as a lack of willpower, lack of self-control that is kind of leading to these outcomes, right? But that being said, there are enough experiments, enough scientific evidence saying that if the above were to be true, technically, if you eat less calories and if you burn more, you should lose fat, right? It happens to an extent, but that's only temporary, right? Because one of the underlying assumptions here is, when we eat, our body needs certain energy to function, right? And if we give it more than we need, right, obviously the extra is getting converted to fat. And secondly, if you give it less, right, it is going to burn, right, whatever else that it needs. But unfortunately, that's not the way the body works. And I'll use a simple example that we would probably relate to, right? If you think about our houses and how we get power, right? One is we depend on the utility to provide us electricity. And for some reason, if that were to go down, we would want to, look at our UPS, which kind of kicks in for and gives us power when the utility is not able to provide it, right? Now, if there are, X lights, Y fans, a few appliances, your refrigerator and AC, all of that that's running, which is consuming energy, right? When you had power, because that's the comfort you want, that's the choice you made. However, should power go down, one of the things we often do is we go and ensure that some of these extra appliances that we need, some of the lights and fans that we're not using, we switch it down, because we wanted to extend the range that the UPS can provide us. right? The body is not too different, because the risk of not doing that is your UPS and your batteries will run out of power and you will be left with no power. Similarly, the body, right, when it realizes that the amount of energy that it is able to kind of source is getting reduced, the way it reacts is it reduces its rate of metabolism, right? So there are many things that take up energy, right? If we do nothing all day, right, that is around 70 to 80% of the energy consumption. That's the heart to beat, the brain to think, the blood to circulate, our temperature to be maintained at the right level, etc., right? And that takes up 72 to 80% of the energy. When we eat, obviously, while that is giving us fuel that we can burn to produce energy, the process of digestion itself also consumes some energy, right? In addition to that, there is the activity, right? Any activity we do that ends up consuming and taking up energy, which is around 10-15%, unless we are do lot of strenuous activity, right? So the bulk of it is our what's called a basal metabolic rate. And when the body senses that the level of energy that is available to the body is coming down, it will automatically kind of get into the UPS mode, right? It will try to look at non-critical functions and kind of slow them down. Temperature in general control that kind of goes down. There will be parts of the body which are non-critical, where it says it's okay if I don't heat it up. And sometimes we felt, right, we'll be feeling a little colder in our hands, maybe in our feet, maybe, etc. These are all times when the body automatically lowers the basal metabolic rate, right? A heart rate, a heart stroke volume, etc. All of those kind of go down. The other thing that does happen is essentially, there's a hormone called ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. There's another hormone called peptide YY, which is our satiety hormone. All of them, these guys, get impacted, and we end up feeling more hungry, because that's the body's way of saying, hey, give me more food, right? And it's the satiation reduction is our body's way saying that, hey, I'm not satisfied. So some of the choices that we make are not because of lack of self-control, but it's more because of the message that we're getting from the action of some of these hormones. It is proven that you reduce, let's say, calories for around 30%. In the short term, you will see reduction, because for the basal metabolic rate to go down, it takes a little while. But after some time, you don't lose weight anymore. And the chances of sustaining it are low. And while there are enough scientific data supporting this, I think it's around us. Almost all of us have tried some of this, and we fail, because at some point in time, we blame it on ourselves, and everybody around us blames it on us, right? Very quickly, it's not sustainable, and our weight kind of comes back at a faster rate. And the reason for that is our basal metabolic rate has gone down, right? And so when we come back to what we used to eat normally, our metabolic rate is down. So even normal food is giving us significantly extra. And the pace at which we kind of come back and, for our basal metabolic rate to come up is very fast. So it's not sustainable, right? It does obviously work in the short term, but it's not sustainable, and your body kind of forces you to get out of that mode. So if you were to understand the onset and progression of, how do we get high fat, right? Essentially, a hormone called insulin plays a very critical role, and to an extent, another hormone called cortisol, right? I'll not cover that at this point in time. But there are reasons why we end up with higher insulin, and I will come to what those reasons are as we go down. But the higher insulin, ensures that one of the functions of insulin is, think of the traffic cop that it says, for the incoming nutrition, what should I do, right? It converts everything that we eat into higher fat. It's got a fat storage function, right? So essentially, we do some actions, we make some choices that end up driving us and letting us to a realm of higher levels of insulin. Insulin is just doing its job. One of its job is to tell the body to store more fat. We start accumulating that fat. When that happens, it leads to, higher ghrelin. We feel more hungry. It leads to lower peptide YY. It also leads to something called leptin resistance. Now, leptin is another hormone that is generated by your fat cells, which is more the feedback loop to help regulate how much we eat. But when it gets resistance, essentially the brain is not able to send a signal saying stop eating, right? And that basically leads us to continue to consume more. And then this feeds, the more we eat and the choices we make on the more that we eat leads to higher insulin. So, it's not that this is the hormonal theory of imbalances that drive, higher fat in the body. All right. It is not about self-control. It is about choices that unleash a set of hormones which we don't control, which end up making us take certain actions, which, end up ensuring that we end up with more fat, right? Let's kind of keep that there. From fat, because fat, has multiple molecules, cholesterol is one of them. Let us go into what I call misunderstanding or understanding cholesterol a little better, right? So if you have to understand, I know we've all done, what we call our lipid panel, which gives us different numbers. There's a total cholesterol number. There's numbers for HDL, your triglycerides, LDL, etc. But first, I want to spend some time on what's called the lipid cycle itself, briefly. And then we'll kind of go into understanding what is an HDL and triglyceride and LDL and so on and so forth, right? So we need fat because different parts of our body use fat to construct various kinds of things, right? Our brain has a lot of fat, and for our brain function to be good, it needs it. Our cell membranes are made of fat, and so there's fat that we need, etc. What we So I'll ask a simple question. Unfortunately, I've not put it out as a quiz, right? One myth that I want to bust is, if eating too much fat increases the fat in the body, then my question is, eating too much spinach, why don't we become green, right? I think it's a very simplistic theory, right? Because our metabolism is not so simple. What we eat doesn't go and kind of sit inside, right? There's a complex array of millions of various biochemical reactions that happen, right? And so, I think if somebody says, it's like you eat a orange seed and a tree will come out. You eat too much spinach, you'll become green. You eat too much fat, will lead to a lot of fat accumulation in the body. It's kind of similar because it is kind of oversimplifying the way the body's processing works, right? And which is why it's a little important to understand the lipid cycle. So when we eat dietary fat, our body produces fat on its own as well, right? But when we eat dietary fat, right, what ends up happening is that it gets absorbed, and then it gets packaged into lipoprotein, right, which is what the L in an HDL is, or the ending L is in an LDL, right? So the job of that is to carry this precious energy giving fuel and give it to parts of the body that needs it, right? So which is where your high density lipoprotein, low density lipoprotein, and there are many others, right, which kind of come, which are more like your FedEx trucks. They capture all the precious fat that gives us energy and that is needed. And there's a signaling called apolipoprotein that's on that package, which tells it where it should deliver, etc. Right? Now, so none of that fat, for example, is directly there in our blood, right? It is there in each of these trucks that is taking it to different parts of our destination, right? If things were working well, this would work well. You would go, you would give all the cells that need the fat, and then you'd come back, right? And then, if you think of it like a truck, again, you'll replenish it and kind of go and give it. There are multiple kinds of problems that can happen. One is address problems. One is, as you're carrying it, two main problems, the way to think about it. What if I lose the address? I don't know who to give it to, right? When that happens, we will not be able to give it to anybody and continue to carry it. That's one problem possible. The second problem that's possible is, what if instead of carrying beneficial things, I'm carrying bad things, right? That's the other kind of problem that can happen, right? So there are various factors. Obviously we've been told LDL, bad cholesterol, HDL, good cholesterol, triglycerides. I don't know if there's a point of view, right? But let's also, if when we look at LDL, there are two types. There are large, fluffy LDL molecules, and there are small, dense LDL molecules, right? And the distinction is important because high LDL in itself is not the problem, right? The problem is high amount of small dense LDL. And the reason is, it is these in a particular kind of environment, right, which is, penetrate what's called your endothelium. Your endothelium is essentially, the inside layer of your arteries, right? And they enter where they're not supposed to go, right? And when that happens, our body has an inbuilt mechanism. There's something called as a kind of a WBC called macrophage that comes and tries to get rid of it. And the way it gets rid of it is it eats it, right? And surrounds it and engulfs it. But if that LDL, very small, dense LDL are the only ones that can penetrate, right? The large, fluffy ones cannot go through and get into the area they're not supposed to go. If they're oxidized, and that oxidation happens through a process called, because of the presence of something called reactive oxygen species, that is, a byproduct, like smoke is in a petrol car or a diesel car. It comes out, it is harmful, and there are ways to deal with it. I'll talk about it a little later. But when the oxidation of this happens, and when a macrophage tries to get rid of it, it dies. And that is what forms the plaque and keeps building over a period of time, right? So the one component that we need to be careful about is the small, dense LDL. And the other thing we need to take care is to ensure that we don't have rampant or higher levels than are needed of reactive oxygen species that end up oxidizing the LDL. And the other thing is, how do we ensure low levels of inflammation? And think of inflammation as rusting of the internals. And when that happens is where the susceptibility of, this oxidized LDL molecule kind of going through the endothelium, creating the plaque, are higher, right? I would say that the total cholesterol does not matter, right? What matters are specific ratios, right? For example, for the moment, high level of triglycerides, not good, right? High levels of LDL actually doesn't matter, but since the test to figure out what kind of LDL it is a little rare and more expensive, we can use that as a surrogate of, higher the LDL. Let's make an assumption that maybe it's a small, dense LDL and we need to be careful about it, right? HDL think of them as the cleansers, right? Who clean up, any kind of deposits that might happen. Higher the LDL, the better it is. There are other things called lipoprotein A, which is something important to track. And there's a role of insulin that we talked about, which is fasting insulin, that we need to be careful about. And kind to summarize this, and without going into too much depth, but as clear takeaways, let's understand that when we have more carbohydrate than we need, right, that gets translated to more insulin, right, which in turn leads to, we go into fat storage mode, which is not necessarily good. And B, it leads to production of higher level of triglycerides, right, in the liver. And when there is a higher level of triglycerides, unfortunately, there's something called dyslipidemia that happens, where your beneficial HDL production gets impacted, and that becomes low, right? So higher carbohydrates lead to, higher triglycerides, to an extent higher LDL, but definitely lowering your HDL, right? Low fat, on the other hand, when we don't eat enough fat, it impacts the cellular membranes, right, and the functioning of the cell, and to an extent the brain, etc. It also leads to higher inflammation, right? So while classical wisdom is of, hey, you know what, higher fat leads to higher risk of cardiovascular disease and higher cholesterol, etc., So reduce fat, increase carb. In fact, it is doing the opposite, right? And this in the mid 1950s was a direction that the world took. And it is from around that time, if you look at the graph, you will realize that the rate of lifestyle diseases has only grown, right? We're getting this advice, we're following this advice, and we're getting sicker, right? And if you were to look at, in fats as well, there are some fats that are good and there are some fats that are bad, right? So again, contrary to popular belief, the fat or the oils that we typically buy in the shelf of our supermarkets, right? These are made from various seeds. All of these are what's called polyunsaturated, fatty acids, right? PUFA. These we believed are better because they were lowering the level of our HDL, right? But these are really dangerous because they lead to, they're pro-inflammatory, right? They lead to higher levels of inflammation, right? And we were demonizing the fats that our ancestors used to use, and which is what nature provides us, right? Which is things like the higher saturated fat naturally available. These increase our HDL, increase our LDL, but they increase the large fluffy LDL, which is, there's nothing wrong, not dangerous at all, right? And they work towards lowering inflammation, right? So just try to put together something around things that we may or might not know about cholesterol, and how do we kind of read it, what ratio should we pay attention to. So if you have a triglyceride by HDL ratio of, you should target it at 1, right? And if you have it greater than 2 or 3, something to be worried about, right? Similarly, HDL, I think there is classical numbers 40, 45 for males, and 50 plus for females. As long as you maintain that minimum and the ratio of TG by HDL and LDL by HDL is low, I think you're in a good place, right? Similarly, lipoprotein is something we need to track, like I said, and fasting insulin is very important. That typically doesn't even get tested, right? Now, while we're talking about high cholesterol, and some of the root causes there also take us on a path, and I'll very quickly at a superficial level cover this. Typically, we see that many of this go hand in hand, right? We end up being obese, right? If we are a woman and premenopausal, many of us go down the path of having polycystic ovarian syndrome. The chances of developing type 2 diabetes are higher, hypertension are higher, cardiovascular risk and higher cholesterol are higher, etc. Now there is a proven theory that kind of unifies it, and which is why the medical world calls this metabolic syndrome, because the pathway, right, they may not be related to each other, but the root cause that is driving this is the same, right? So these are multiple pathways and they get manifested, and we see the same people having one more of these. And I'll tell you, people on this webinar, there are many people that have enrolled. We've split it by, we've got something for obesity, we've got something else for diabetes, right? But the people who are enrolling for multiple, because these are seeing more than one of these, disorders. And there's a reason, right? And the other lifestyle disorders that are kind of tied together, right, are your fatty liver, your kidney disease, your, neuropathy, retinopathy. All of these, the underlying pathway is very similar, and we'll kind of get to that, right? And I think if we have one of the above, right, high cholesterol or obesity, etc., we should know that we are at a higher risk of each of these, right? So a similar diagram, a little more complicated, but essentially there are choices we make that leads to, I'm taking one of those pathways, which is the insulin pathway, right? A higher level of insulin leads to what's called insulin resistance. To simply understand it, overexposure to something reduces its effectiveness, and that's what is at play. Take the same medicine, its effectiveness reduces because the body gets used to that environment. So when there's too much insulin, right, consistently over a period of time, it leads to the effectiveness of that insulin reducing. When that happens, the amount of glucose in our bloodstream increases. When that happens, essentially the liver, through a process called de novo lipogenesis, is converting all of that sugar into triglycerides, right? And when that happens, HDL production goes down, LDL production goes up, and As part of this, there is deposition of fat that happens in your liver, in your pancreas, essentially in your abdominal region around the organs. This is called visceral fat, right? More dangerous than any other kind of fat. If you had fat below the skin called subcutaneous fat, etc., much less dangerous. But in many people, it is seen. You see the central obesity, that is a indicator. Unfortunately, for some people who are seen to be lean, they still could end up with fat around their internal organs, and unfortunately they don't even see that they are at risk, right? So it's important to understand the visceral fat, which is a sign of imbalance and the liver overworking, etc. And if you move forward, that leads to higher triglycerides, lower HDL, which increases the risk of arterial plaque and hence heart disease, right? And there are 2-3 other pathways at work. Essentially, sodium retention increases, which leads to a higher level of fluid retention, which leads to hypertension. That's one of the reasons for hypertension, right? Obviously, obesity, because all of that extra glucose is being converted to fat and being sent to different parts of the body through the bloodstream to be stored for a later use, right? And a similar pathway is where deposits get, as our body works, there's a byproduct. We know the byproduct which we, go to the bathroom for, but there are other byproducts which comes out when we breathe, through our skin, etc. as well. There's other byproducts within, which is garbage that needs to be cleansed, right? So the body has a maintenance cycle which works typically when we sleep, right, called autophagy. And it's not just about rest, but autophagy is at play where weaker cells get recycled. And similarly, there's deposits as our brain works of things called beta amyloid and tau protein. They need to be cleansed, and there's something called as glial fluid that kind of cleanses those. However, when you have high levels of insulin, they don't function as well, and deposits of this increase, and that leads us to problems such as Alzheimer's and dementia, etc. Right? This is just where everything comes crash, boom, bang. It's all kind of interconnected, and that's the key takeaway, right? So if you were to think about it, if we see seepage, our paint coming off, right? What do? Right? One is we can get it repainted, right? If you see a bulb that frequently, is failing, we keep replacing the bulb, right? And that, I would say, is the symptomatic approach. That you don't know what the problem is, but you're seeing paint coming off, you're fixing it, you're seeing bulbs going fut, and you're kind of replacing them. But what's important to stop this from happening is you need to kind of go to the root cause, right? And very important to ensure that the problem does not repeat is to fix the root cause. And in this example, we would realize it's probably a broken pipe within the wall, right? And there's water that's coming, that's it's seepage, as well as impacting the electrical circuitry. Or we could realize that the root cause is there is some part of the roof that is weak, and when it rains is when more water comes in, it's not being prevented, etc. But you fix that, these problems don't go away. Otherwise, if you take a symptomatic approach, it is solved for the moment, but it'll keep recurring, and the underlying problem hasn't gone away, right? So if you were to kind of think about it, and if you take a look at obesity, we would say higher fat in the body than we need. If you take a look at type 2 diabetes, we would say higher glucose in our bloodstream than we need, etc. Right? Symptomatic approach, which is what most of the medicines do, is how do I artificially take that glucose and push it away, right? But the real question is, why is the body producing so much glucose? What can we do about it? Similarly, if you were to look at high cholesterol, right, it could lead to deposits in our arteries, right? And that's the reason we're worried about it, which increases, let's say, risk of cardiac event. The medicines that we take, one, they work on the liver. How do I reduce the cholesterol production, which are your statin class of drugs, right? Medicines to thin your blood, etc. But the core reason is, how do we prevent those deposits from happening, right? How do we ensure that the environment that leads to that is taken away? How do we reduce inflammation and oxidative stress? Unless you solve for that, we may get a sense that we are in control, and whether we like it or not, there is enough data that proves that with or without taking cholesterol reducing drugs, there is no change in the end outcomes, right? Mortality remains the same, the risk remains the same, right? So it's not like these drugs are helping, right? They are giving a semblance of control because we're looking at the wrong reason. Our understanding of it is wrong. If we want to solve for it, we need to get the root cause of it out. We need to ensure that we have the right balance of the right kind of cholesterol, because cholesterol is still needed. We need to transport fat to different parts of the body. It's needed, but it should be one that doesn't cause harm, right? So, if you were to understand the progression of disease, it is not a switch. It doesn't suddenly, you're not okay today and tomorrow you wake up with high cholesterol, right? You're not okay today and tomorrow you suddenly get diagnosed with diabetes. It's a continuum. This continuum takes 8, 10, 12 years to kind of progress, right? And while we know the end manifestation of disease, we've seen it in so many people, hey, he's got sugar or diabetes, a high cholesterol, obese, and so on and so forth. What's happening underneath, which goes wrong, is what is at play over years before it reaches and breaches acceptable limits, which is when you would be diagnosed with a particular kind of a disorder. And that is the central box, right? It is those metabolic imbalances, right? And there are many more hormones that are at play. And, a big one of them is insulin. Like I said, there is leptin, and then there's something called adiponectin and glucagon and cortisol. There's a lot of these and imbalances in these that are contributing, right? So the hormonal sensitivity and effectiveness has to be maintained. That is when our metabolism will work well, right? Our metabolic flexibility, our engine, right, which is our cell, and mitochondria in our cell, which creates energy, which is what keeps us going, needs to work well and needs to be able to work on different kinds of fuel, right? Our cellular health and function, extremely important, right? In gram for gram, right, our mitochondria produces 10,000 times the amount of energy that the sun produces. That obviously we don't have so many grams of it. 10% of our body's weight would be the sum of all the mitochondria that we have. The metabolically active cells end up with more mitochondria, which are called organelles. So our heart's one cell, for example, could have up to 5,000 of these. If that stops functioning properly, right, it leads to a cascading effect of impact that leads to disease, right? It is, the reactive oxygen species is generated in this process called oxidative phosphorylation. That is the energy generating cycle and the electron transport chain that happens in the mitochondria. If we have too many of those, RO minus is what leads to, inflammation, etc. Right? In a way, it is also something that reduces our DNA sanctity and builds an environment where mutations are more easily happening. Our defense mechanism, our body has an army of its own, a navy, different kind of defense agencies to fight against and help against different kinds of attacks, right? You see some of them listed, and immunity is something that all of us know. Unfortunately, when some of these go, other thing that happens is it lowers and weakens our defense mechanism, and that makes us more susceptible to disease. And if you trace that back, you realize that the metabolic imbalance in cellular health and function are contingent and dependent on choices that we make every day. Choices in terms of what do we eat, when do we eat, how physically active are we, right? Stress, which is what takes us down the path of cortisol, etc. Sleep, and sleep again, not necessarily for rest, but primarily to ensure that the maintenance of the body happens well. And when you wake up, all the waste, metabolic waste, is cleansed, right? Different parts of our body work well at different points in time in a 24-hour cycle. How do we ensure that it's aligned? A slice of pizza at 11 a.m., the way our body kind of digests it and metabolizes it is completely different if you had the same slice of pizza at 11 p.m., right? And we need to ensure that they're in sync. And if you kind of go a little deeper into that, right? But before we do that, a quick set of takeaways, right? As we've tried to establish, almost all of the lifestyle disorders have a common cause, right? Your metabolic imbalance, insulin resistance, etc. These manifest as different diseases. If we are heading from a place of good health to a destination of bad health, and it is a journey, right? A root cause approach is the only one that can help us make a U-turn and head back towards good health. Any symptomatic approach like taking medicines, etc., it may give us a false sense of control, but it is important in the sense that it helps slow down the velocity, but slowly but surely we're still heading towards the same destination, right? To have lasting and reversing effect, we need to rebalance our metabolism, we need to strengthen our body's defense mechanism, we need to improve our cellular health and function. We do that, we solve for the root cause, and when we do that, high cholesterol and the badness of it is easily beatable, right? So another quick quiz before we head. I think some of the answers were kind of apparent, but let's just do this. Eating saturated fat, butter, ghee, unhealthy, right? What do we believe? Similarly, we have choices of burning fat. Walking is one choice, less intensity. Exercise is another short, higher intensity. What do we believe, right? So let's just take a quick poll of this. Okay, let's see how the results say. Eating butter, ghee is unhealthy. True. 60% say it's false. Okay, let's move on to the next one, please. What do we believe? Choice of, while everything is good, right? Do we believe walking produces less impact and gym exercise, muscle building is, what's needed? What's the general sense? Okay, so 80% saying this is false, 20% this is true. Cool. Let's proceed. So basically, if we have to make that U-turn, if we have to solve for the root cause, the pendulum of health, which has, kind of started swinging from a state of health to state of disease, we need to find a way to swing it back. Some of the choices that we have made are what are driving the pendulum to shift. We need to undo those and make choices that will kind of get the pendulum back and take us away from the state of disease, reduce our state of risk, and take us towards a state of good health, right? And if you have to solve for the root cause, insulin, we realize, is an important hormone. So we need to ensure that we regulate this behavior. Fat, healthy fat important. We need to ensure we get the right amount of it. Different bodies defense mechanism important, like our gut microbiome, which has a lot of bacteria, etc. Now, while you see a lot of technical terms on the left hand side, all of those can be achieved if we make the right choices that you see on the right hand side, right? What we eat, when we eat, is 50-60% of what drives us towards better health outcomes, right? Exercise does play a role, 10-15%. Stress is a pathway, right? Managing it is important. Sleep, super important, not just from resting, but from ensuring that maintenance happens, as we spoke. So, in the next couple of minutes, I'll just leave this on the table. We'll cover some of the key points. Maybe there's a few takeaways that you can take and apply it, and you'll start seeing some benefits. One is in terms of nutrition. Let's understand that there's what's called macronutrition, which is what are driving energy cycles within our body, and micronutrition, which are important to keep different parts of our body functioning well, right? So the carbohydrates, proteins, fat, all form part of the macronutrition, and vitamins and minerals, different varieties of them, are the micronutrients that help our body function well, right? Fiber, important. It feeds those beneficial bacteria that reside in our gut, which are extremely important for us to be able to extract the nutrition. Certain things that even in the unsaturated fat, omega-3, and which has two components, EPA, DHA, and something called ALA, extremely important and beneficial, right? Anti-inflammatory. Omega-6, not good, right? We need to find the right ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. We need to have the right ratio of sodium and potassium, right, to ensure that our blood pressure, etc., is in control, and so on. So one thing that we saw in the quiz, and I want to underscore, if there's one thing that you will take away, stop eating seed oils or using seed oils. Go back to what our great grandparents and parents used to use: butter, ghee, saturated fat, coconut oil, extremely healthy, they drive the right kind of behavior, you need to have it in your diet, right? And that's what for centuries we've been using before, industrialization agent, but these are not problems. Whereas it's only after machines have come that we're able to get oil from very small amount of oil in something that's not easy to extract, which is what gets marketed and sold as heart healthy, which is in our shelves. Stay away from those, right? Ensure that we get the right micronutrition to ensure our body continues to work well. Um, Two takeaways from this alignment with the circadian rhythm, I would say eat 2 or 3 meals, eat it in a 10-hour window, or in as low window as you possibly can. This is a concept called intermittent fasting. It helps in regulating our insulin behavior, right? And ensure that you eat your dinner 3 hours before you go to bed. That will ensure that the effectiveness of the maintenance that happens in the night is better, right? In terms of exercise, the reality is, they serve two different purposes. Walking helps in a purpose. It activates more of a kind of muscle called our slow twitch muscles. And, exercise helps us build muscle. Both important, right? But for different purposes. If you want to solve for a problem of metabolism, etc., walking is super important. If there's, 1 hour you have, please spend it on brisk walk continuously. That's what is needed to activate your slow twitch muscles. However, if you have 2 hours, make sure you do that as well as do some building muscle, which definitely does help, right? And then, obviously improving your strength, flexibility, etc. Over exercising is again not good. It leads to higher inflammation, and there's more reactive oxygen species that kind of get released. Doing, it's all a balance. Doing it the right amount is what is important, right? Stress, again, approach it at two levels. One, adopt practices that will help you reduce and the level of stress you might feel and feel calm, etc., like meditation and breathing and so on and so forth. At the same time, as we talked about, root cause is also important. If you don't know the reason why you're stressed, right, it's very important to speak to those people who can get inside your head, help you understand the reasons driving stress. If it's a bad commute, you know it and you can fix it. But if it's a relationship problem, if it is a deep-seated something that happened in the past that's playing up, you need somebody that can help you with that. Reducing your stress, removing it will help in getting better health outcomes, right? And like I said, 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep, especially with no metabolism happening, which is when if you eat 3 hours before you sleep, extremely important. And there are tools and techniques on how you can improve if you have trouble sleeping. And do get in touch with us, and we can separately help you get some tips on how this can be done better. So takeaways, I think lifestyle changes are the only way to solve for the root cause. Nutrition matters. We put in bad material, our body structure gets affected. It's like building a structure with, hollow bricks and rotten wood. You give the, choose the right cement, you choose the right brick, you choose the right wood. Right now, the choices that we believe are right, unfortunately, are wrong. Right? If you look at our kitchen shelves, there's all of the wrong material going in, which is impacting our, internal structures of the cell, etc. So sleep is more than a mechanism of rest, right? And maintenance is what happens. So if we make the right tweaks to our lifestyle, right, high cholesterol is something that we can easily reverse and ensure that it remains that same on a sustainable way, right? And now kind of shifting to who we are in a couple of minutes, and then we'll get into the Q&A section. As I've spoken before, our goal is how do we eradicate lifestyle diseases, right? While it seems like a very tough problem and a very ambitious plan, logically it splits into two things. One, people who have these, how do we help them get better? And two, people who don't have it, how do we ensure they don't get it, right? And that's something we'll take up later, and that's more an intervention needed at a children level, helping them with understanding the right choices and making the right choices, and hopefully they'll never get here, right? But right now the current focus is how do we have people that need help and that need better health outcomes, how do we partner with them, right? So our solution, one is we have a 90-day health restore program that kind of accelerates your journey and start swinging your pendulum with multiple vectors that we spoke about, working together without you having to do the research and go through the hard work of figuring it out, but you could on your own, but it is not easy to execute, right? All of this is safe, natural, and extremely convenient. So that's one thing that we are offering to people that have this problem. You have to solve it. Try to do it on your own. If you find it difficult, and if researching it and applying it is complicated, we can help. We've just made it easy, right? Second is, for some people that may want to assess where they are, right? Not just in terms of what doctor says and the parameters we see, but also the underlying processes, the early warning signals, the state of risk. I think we've defined a very comprehensive one-time package called lifestyle risk assessment, that people can take advantage of, that gives you in easy to understand ways an assessment of where you are and what you need to be doing to kind of go down on a path of improved health outcomes, right? This is our program. All the components that you see are included, right? As a part of it, we want to be a one-stop shop where you don't need to worry about any component. Food is, like I said, nutrition is extremely important. And in the nutrition, not just are we ensuring you get the precise mix of the right kind of nutrients, but we're also ensuring that you get the different kind of taste and variety that doesn't make you believe that this is restrictive or that you're not able to indulge, right? And that's where we've got gourmet meals designed by chefs, at the same time controlled by nutritionists and enforced by a NutriSmart AI system that we've built. And this is something we provide to you wherever you are, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the night, right? Similarly, there may be certain type of exercises if you want to build a stronger body and become a bodybuilder. That's not the approach we've taken. We've curated those that help improve your state of health, help improve your metabolism, right? And these are available both in our studios, which for the moment are not working, as well as through online live sessions, which we're doing now, which are working well with a live trained instructor that will kind of get you to do this. Mindful meditation and counseling, both from a reactive standpoint to help you calm down, as well as from a proactive standpoint to help you identify the reason for stress, right? Smarter health assessment. We talked about that, a predictive panel that we do in terms of early warning signs and so on. We take a snapshot before you start the program and every month thereon to track the progress, and very easy to interpret, understand, and execute reports, right? We put together a team of the right kind of consultants to ensure that any question you may have, be it of the medical type where we have doctors, be it of exercise, etc., where we have physios and nutritionists and counselors available, and multiple modes of engaging with them, right? Built for convenience, everything happens on your doorstep. Food follows where you are. Exercise comes to you. Essentially, technology that helps you kind of work with easily, right? And manage all your transactions. At the same time, we also have the human touch with a dedicated alt-life coach that works with you through the program, right? We're building a larger community, right? Where we do activities for all of us that are beneficial, right? Things that we don't know, getting experts to talk about us. It could be webinars, it could be events that are health oriented, etc. And one would get access to that as well, right? One is the 90-day program, but we also realize that there may be certain things to be done beyond, and that's where we work with you depending on where your starting point was, and at the end of the 90 days, the extent of improvement you've seen. What are your goals, right? Do you want to get to first rank? Do you want to regain the health you had as of 10 years back? What do you need to do? Are you okay with, hey, I'm good with where I am, I just need to maintain it? So we will understand what is the status now, what is your goal, what is your intent, and then help you find the right intervention. It could be very simple as, you're doing well now, head out, do whatever you need, but ensure we keep taking the diagnostic test. If we see some of the state of risk becoming worse, we'll call you back. Or it could be, let's do a week, a month of this, and so on. But for some people, they may want to continue down the path of improvement, and saying, this is not good enough. I want to get to more and more and more improvement. And there are little deeper ways that we can engage, but very flexible way of engaging once we get beyond, including training you on how to make some of this at home. How do you apply some of these rules, providing the recipes, raw materials, etc., right? Or training your spouse and so on. So that's pretty much covers the session. high cholesterol can be beaten. Like I said, lifestyle changes that drive metabolic rebalancing and improving cellular health, and stronger defense mechanism is crucial for that. And we, as Alt Life, have made it extremely easy and convenient to achieve guaranteed results. And we are applying cutting edge science in safe and natural ways, right? So apply these principles, you will get to better health outcomes. If it's difficult, you live with partner with Alt Life, and we will jointly beat high cholesterol, right? So with that, I'd want to kind of close out and get into our Q&A session, right? Obviously, our request to you is to, if there are things that you've taken away, which hopefully you have, which you can apply, then maybe you and people you know, your friends, family, colleagues, etc., that have problems that need fixing, right? It could be high cholesterol, it could be obesity, it could be diabetes. I think talk about us, get us to your company community. We're happy to talk about it. Our goal is to reach out to as many people, A, with the knowledge, and B, for some of them that need help in that journey, to provide that journey. And you can see the details of our website out there, Live Alt Life, our social media handles, Live Alt Life. Write to us, hello@livealtlife, and a number that works 8 to 8, all days of the week. So I'll kind of stop there, and I want to take the time to thank you for coming over on a Sunday evening and spending time with us. I hope it's been beneficial. I hope you stay safe. And I'll like to end the formal part of the webinar, and we'll go down the Q&A and see if there are there are questions that you might have that we'd like to answer.
So Vivek, there is one question in the Q&A section.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the question. I'll read it out. Conventional doctors are quick to describe anti-cholesterol medication for high cholesterol conditions. Since inflammation and oxidative stress are the core reasons for this, could you re-explain once again the relationship between inflammation, oxidative stress, and cholesterol buildup? That's why and how lifestyle changes become important. Thank you. Okay. So inflammation, core of it, problem. And if you want to fix inflammation, one is the energy cycle, which releases reactive oxygen species. Second, for that, for example, there are various sources of fuel. Carbohydrate or glucose is a source of fuel. Other source of fuel is obviously fat, right? And then the engine is able to take each one of this and produce energy, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, at a cellular level. One has a lot more exhaust, which is glucose, which produces more ROS. The higher amount of fat that we take, which is healthy, which is the definition of healthy fat, it's like the electric engine, cleaner way, reduces our ROS. That's one. Secondly, we need a lot of the right kind of material to be going in. And there are vitamins which are fat soluble, vitamins which are water soluble. There are some that are storable and some that aren't. But we need to ensure that we eat those, the right kind of raw material that provides us that vitamins, which is what will work with the, ROS to reduce inflammation. One marker I would say you need to look at is something called HSCRP, high sensitive C-reactive protein, right? And see if there is evidence of chronic inflammation that needs to be fixed, right? And it's a combination of factors that will lead to fixing it. Cholesterol on its own, not a problem. Certain components in a certain environment are a problem, right? Triglycerides are a problem. Ensure you reduce your bunch of triglycerides by reducing the amount of glucose your body has. Ensure that metabolism and the hormonal balance is better by reducing the amount of insulin. So one key role is anything that drives up insulin, how do we kind of get that down? So it's a little complicated, right? But I hope that's something you understand. And why are carbs inflammatory? That's another question that I see. Carbs are inflammatory because this process of oxidative phosphorylation that happens, one, right, is at a cellular level. The electron transport chain, right, which is something called Krebs cycle, right, at a mitochondria producing energy. When it uses glucose as the input for energy production, the amount of reactive oxygen species, right, which get generated are higher, right? When it uses energy ATP is converted from fat, the ROS is lower. That's one. Second reason is higher level of carbohydrates means higher glucose in the bloodstream. Higher glucose in the bloodstream means higher amount of insulin, right? And higher amount of insulin leads you down to multiple pathways, as we saw, which are pro-inflammatory, right? And which increase the level of inflammation in the body. And like I said, this is something that we've seen, and we've measured all of this over, what should I say, the people. All of these are values that we see with the way we've packaged it consistently keeps going down, right? And, it's all natural food, nothing processed, used by us. As we kind of eat it, you will start seeing the healing process and some of these key parameters move, right? And in some way I appreciate, and I think to Ranbir, who specifically asked this question, happy to kind of do a more detailed dive, right, if that's something that you're interested in, even intellectually curious about, separately, right? Okay, let's take a quick one or two questions if there are any. Otherwise, again, like I said, okay, yeah, surely we can talk further. Fantastic. So, thank you all. Hope you have a good rest of the Sunday. Hope you stay safe in the, uncertain external environment and stay safe. While we need to be careful about the dangers of, let's say, coronavirus, etc. Let's understand that if we have any of these lifestyle disorders, it does put us at a higher risk of complications, right? And this is something each one of us is facing. I urge you to understand what it is that you need to do to ensure you get to a state of better health. Happy to help both with advice as well as with solutions that can help you on that journey. Thank you and good night.